So,
Oh, I was just about to start.
it's good.
Did you want to clear something up?
Ben, do you want me to start the Chrome thing, or do you want to just take it and keep going? I don't.
Um, if you want to talk about it, I just found something else that's somewhat relevant. Apparently, Traction just came out with a free version of their DAW, so I'll
Okay.
just throw that out there.
Yeah, there's a new synthesizer from Roland that's pretty neat too, but I might just throw that in the notes or something. In
All right,
case.
for reals now.
Hold on,
Okay.
let's let Ben finish typing.
I'll find a link later.
You good?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Ben Furman,
And I'm Nate Blyton.
and this is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start with some news.
Yeah, so some cool news in the HTML5 land. Chrome gets hardware MIDI support. It's a big deal, and if you're not using Google Chrome, what's wrong with you, first of all? Here's a great reason to start. The latest update lets you use MIDI gear to interact with compatible HTML5 pages, and Create Digital Music has a really good rundown of different people that have implemented this technology already. We'll have a link to it in the doc, but yeah, Ben's turned me on to this, and it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, back at the College Music Society's national conference last year, they had a really awesome symposium on web-based audio and HTML5, and the big complaint that everyone presenting had was that it didn't have hardware MIDI support. Well, now it does, at least on Chrome. So go get it.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that just came across my email is that Traction, the DAW that was previously owned by Mackie, is now back in the hands of its original owners, and version 4 is apparently going to be free. You have to register an account with them, but a free DAW is a free DAW. And upgrade prices for other versions are as low as 30, and buying different versions is as low as 60. So if you're looking for a DAW, why not try Traction?
Mm-hmm. Windows, Mac, and Linux, all platforms you might want.
Indeed. But today we are excited. We have a very interesting guest. He is a teaching professor of computer music at the University of California, San Diego. As the technical director of the Center for Contemporary Music at Mills College, he worked with James Tenney and Larry Polanski and helped create a 4-channel spatial audio processor for NASA's Ames research. And he wrote SoundHack, which is a program that I myself and many of our past guests have been very enthusiastic users of for years.
Mm-hmm.
So, very special welcome to Tom Arab.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, that was very old stuff, the NASA stuff and the CCM stuff. That's nearly 20 years ago, but cool to hear that.
It is, but how many times do you get to introduce a guest that worked at NASA?
Right.
Oh, yeah, and working at NASA was fun. We did a bunch of spatial audio stuff. Their idea was if pilots could hear different people from different places, they could more closely identify people who are doing like flight control, environmental control, and this kind of thing. But when it came down to it, none of them wanted to wear stereo headphones. They wanted to have one ear free to pick up an old analog phone, and so the whole project was sort of, well, interesting, but thanks, guys.
Yeah. Sounds like a lot of musicians I've worked with who, like, you give them this detailed mix and then they kind of just go like this.
Yeah.
Take off one ear or whatever.
You got to hear yourself. You got to hear reality. I can appreciate that.
For those of you who are listening at home and not watching the live stream, Nate just did the DJ headphone.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Turn it upside down or whatever, yeah.
Yeah. Ear cup behind the ear.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
It's classic.
No, but tell us about SoundHack. this is one of the most useful plugins that I've ever used.
Okay. Well, Soundhack started as a program. I started programming it in, say, 1989. I was working with Bob Ashley on his opera improvement. And he had this, part of the idea of the opera was that each scene had a different physical location and metaphorical location. And this was all sketched out to us as musicians to, develop music that fit these spaces. So before I worked at Mills College, I was a research assistant at UCSD back in the mid-'80s, and we worked on sound file convolution, phase vocoder, these kind of things. And I was really just the assistant, but I thought, wow, it would be great to get all these techniques and use them at Mills College where we had zero budget. I think we bought a Mac 2, and that was like 3 years' budget to buy a Mac 2. So I started programming, and I didn't get things done in time for Bob Ashley's opera, but I was thinking I'd really wanted sound file convolution, so I could, if I wanted to make it sound like you're in an airport ticket counter, which was one of the scenes, we could do that, and I could add things which would, give me sort of a metaphorical space as well. I could bring in different sound sources and convolve with that. At least that was my idea. But that's how I got started on Soundhack. So that program, it took me a couple years. It came out in '91. And I think it was one of the first freeware computer music softwares. C-Sound may have been out around then as well. But that I improved over the '90s. And I improved it to the point where if you do develop projects, there's a point where things get too big and sort of disorganized, and it needed a bit of cleaning. So either I was to rebuild it completely, but at the same time, this was around '98, plugins became a real thing. So the VST spec was out, and I started writing plugins. So I think I started with a decimation plugin, which I called Decimate, and that came out in 2000, 2001, something like that. And then I just started bringing more of the spectral stuff into plugins, and I think now I have 17, 18 plugins, and it's now reached the point again where things are too large to maintain. But I'm also a computer musician and a recording engineer, and I'm always looking at things that I think don't exist in the studio, things that are more interesting than what would be commercial. So I try to bring those things back into the studio, or either bringing old ideas or new ideas. So that's the development of Soundhack in a nutshell.
Cool.
Yeah. Now, with Soundhack, the website, I know you have the Spectral Shaper plugin set, and you also have a freeware set that is extremely popular among a lot of people that I talk to at conferences and at various festivals. So the spectral parts are paid, and the freeware is not. Do you see any difference in usage statistics based on paid versus freeware?
Oh, God. I honestly don't keep track of that stuff at all. I mean, occasionally I hear from someone that, I'm using your plugin. Mm-hmm. And that's great. But I don't look at downloads and, that kind of stuff. I certainly keep track of customers. And I think I wanted to, I did want to be taken seriously among the commercial market. This was, I think, one of the main motivations for doing the paid software. Mm-hmm. And it was getting difficult to get relationships with DigiDesign unless they saw you as not just a freeware plugin producer. And even though among the computer music crowd, most people know who I am, if I go to a pro audio show, it's like, oh, Tomer Soundhack, that sounds weird. What, why did you name your company that? Don't people get offended? I get that kind of thing. But it gave me a little bit of legitimacy. But it also reflects that the paid stuff, I do put a lot more work into those plugins. Right. The freeware stuff is generally stuff I've developed at UCSD. I teach a few classes in computer music software design, and whenever I teach the class, if I have time, I try to develop a plugin myself and show the students ideas of modulation, dealing with signal saturation, how to put filters within any algorithm, all those kind of things. So if you look at, say, all my delay plugins, I was showing the students how to do, all the basic delay things, plus modulation, plus granulation, overlap add, pitch shifting, all those ideas went in there. And at the same time, I was trying to make a delay that was more exciting than what I was finding, which I thought things were kind of dry and sort of clinical, which is good. Clinical is good, but
well, if you're performing surgery, maybe.
What's that?
If you're performing surgery, maybe, yes.
Well, no, there's a point where you want your delay to be clean and you want the repeats to be controlled. But, I'm old enough to remember analog equipment, and I like things to be a little bit more uncontrolled, where you have to actually interact with the equipment to get it to hit those sweet spots.
Yeah, and I imagine from a programming standpoint, that must be more work to get the software to behave in a little bit of an unpredictable way, or to program in those kind of that range.
Yeah, I mean, with most things, you can sort of identify that there's a place where things will be very clean and very controlled, but then also identify a place where you can, get things to misbehave a bit, and then you find other spaces where it misbehaves to the point where it just dies, and you try to avoid that part. So you try to make things robust, but able to make extremely gentle sounds and extremely painful sounds. And then the trick is to balance it, and when you adjust your knobs to make a wide range in the middle, which is what most people will want most of the time, so that those extremes are at the extreme.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we spend a week in class talking about knob range design and just how to tune it for performance.
That's amazing. And most of the kind of programming land I live in now, or these days, is PD, and I was really happy to see that so many of these plugins exist as PD externals. And I understand that you spent the last couple summers and earlier developing or porting over these plugins.
Yeah, I worked with a grad student, I admit, William Brent. He's no longer a grad student. He's now a professor at the American University. But he did most of the work. He did almost all the work.
Okay.
I did some touch up, and then I did the Max ports because I was the only one who had done the Max API, and then I had an undergrad do the Windows port, Daniel Arias. So yeah, and that was maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Cool. Yeah.
William's probably looking at tenure right about now, So.
Part of the portfolio, I imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
But yeah, I did want to. I mean, part of it there was to take all of this paid stuff and put it out there free for those people who are actually doing experimental computer music. I didn't want to see computer musicians to have to pay for these things because they probably aren't making a lot of money on their music, and
Sure,
you
right.
experiment, if
Yes.
you're experimenting,
Yeah, now I did notice when those first came out, I had been using things like Bubbler in Max using the VST wrapper that Max provides. And having a native version, I definitely noticed an increase in terms of having lower latency and less CPU usage. But did you notice anything else that happened when you converted them over to the Max API?
Oh, yeah, it's pretty much the same, really. The Max once had an issue where it tried to redraw VSTs a lot, but I believe that's gone away. And in all my VSTs, I protected against that as well. I make sure that if I time how long since it's been repainted and try to keep it to a minimum. But very early on, we had this interaction problem with Max where it would be very inefficient on my VSTs because I allowed it to repaint as often as possible, and Max would go ahead and do it. But yeah, it's just to get to the VST, it's one call and it's a parallel call for the external. It's really very little difference at all.
Okay.
Mostly the code's just pasted in. Now that it's more efficient or not, that I can't speak to. I'm sure that's maybe the VST tilde object and how that deals, but I'm sure it's nearly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was several computers ago, so
yeah.
I mean, nowadays I could probably run them both simultaneously and not get above 1%. But
bunch of instances, yeah, it'd be fine.
Yeah, and my attitude toward efficiency is, yes, I'll try to get the best efficiency I can, but when I'm dealing with computer stuff, I mean, you've got a really powerful computer on your desktop, and most of the time it's idling, so I feel like unless you're using 99-100%, you're not using your hardware. So I'm totally fine with taking up as much bandwidth as the process requires.
Okay.
Yeah, just let the hardware catch up if we need to. Yeah.
Yeah, the hardware will get faster,
As it always does. That's
Yay,
interesting.
Moore's law.
Yeah, exactly. And so, speaking of Max and PD, I had read in a past interview that you did with Cycling 74 that building plugins, that Max and PD would be a part of your process of building whatever you were making in that and then porting it over to C. I was wondering if that's still kind of what your workflow is like, or how do you go about building these plugins?
Yeah, but that's definitely the case. I don't call it, yeah, never mind. Workflow always makes me laugh, but PD is usually where I build my plugins and I try out ideas, and you reach a point in both PD and Max where the math gets harder in the language. So, I mean, this is the case with all languages. You just can't get atomic enough. Or maybe you can, but you have to then open another door. So I usually try to use very sort of basic methods in building my algorithms in either PD or Max. Not too strange of objects, and once I get there, well, I try to use objects that I can mock up myself in C, and then once I get to the point where I can't get any better, I then move the whole thing over to C. And I've done that with both my plugins. I've done that with any hardware I've developed, firmware. Always start with Max and PD, and then work into C or assembly. And then when I'm developing it, I definitely use Max and PD to test the things too. So it's my signal source, my analysis tool, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
You mentioned hardware as well, and I was excited to see on your website the Echophone. Is a collaboration between you and another group to build a hardware manifestation of some of your delay and other algorithms and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated with modular synthesizers and analog synthesis, and I could never afford it when I was a kid or until now, really. They've only become cheap enough recently. But at the point at which synthesizers became digital and you had to rely on buttons and tiny LCD screens, that's when I became interested in computer music and programming in things like C-Sound and C-Music, where you had nice screens of text to describe your piece, And so I always liked this more expansive feeling of patching lots of things together, and this I think the music and languages do a wonderful job at. But recently there's been this modular resurgence, and I was visiting the booth at the NAMM show. I was visiting the Make Noise booth and talking to them about they made a module called the Phonogene, and I was we were talking granular synthesis and sampling, and how to do repeats and clock division and all that kind of stuff. And then I was talking to Tony Rolando, who's the head of the company and the guy who designs everything there. And I told him to check out my plugins, so he checked them out and called me back later and said, "Hey, you want to design a module for me?" So I just jumped on it.
Yeah.
And at that point, we did the Echophone because I thought it would be sort of a nice proof of concept. Could I do a pitch shifting delay line? I was programming on a DSP PIC chip, which is a 16-bit microprocessor with a single cycle multiply. It has a 32-bit accumulator, so it's very low resolution. I was doing lots of multiple operations to double my resolution, but it does have a reasonable clock speed, and I was able to get it done, so we put that together. Since then, I developed a reverb, which we named the Herb Verb, and that one I sort of developed my own reverb algorithm, and we worked on the ARM chip for that one, and we're about to release a third. So this has definitely been a big focus for me recently.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, and I know with the recent upswing in Eurorack modules in particular, that this is something that I really want to get into myself as well, starting to build analog synthesizers. So do you have an analog synth that you test these out on as well?
Oh yeah, I have accumulated my own. I'm holding it up for the camera.
Oh my goodness.
It's yeah, this is, I mean, it's an expensive hobby, I've got to say, but the one thing that I do like about Eurorack synths is that it gives you something that has knobs, and the knobs have assigned functions, and you can start learning how to play it, and you're not remapping controllers. I mean, when doing a piece on PD, it's great to set things up for performance, but this is more of an instrument. It's a different beast. Yeah, it's each little component is not so expensive, so you tend to sort of collect things, and it gets more complex. But all the time you're sort of learning to play it as well, and getting familiar with all the quirks and limits of each knob, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, literally much more hands-on, getting dirty with.
Yeah, and the other thing is there's sort of everyone who's building modules for this is sort of cottage industry. Mm-hmm. So you get the sense that you're sharing in this community of ideas. I mean, it's like PD with all the many externals that you pick up from everyone. You're sort of sharing everyone's approach to everything, and you can sort of customize your system. And at the same time, you can talk to the creators and get to know them and get to know why they built something, and influence their direction. So it's a nice community.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So in addition to programming and doing audio engineering, you're a computer musician as well. Has these hardware synths been a part of? Have you had any performance opportunities with it?
Oh God, really, honestly, I've spent so much time developing these hardware synths that it's really just taken away performance opportunities. In that it's taken away any time I would have had to develop a piece or work on something. But really, I'm still for performance. I mean, the last piece I did was Williams mix. I redid John Cage's Williams mix, and that I did in PD. And yeah, that took a year to do. It took it took a whole summer.
Yeah.
I do want to get to work on Alvin Lucier's Gentle Fire and try to work on a performance of that. Okay. But I need time, definitely.
Yeah, that's all of these.
Yeah, that's a massive undertaking.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the modular stuff and that fitting in with that, yes, I'd like to make a module that would allow me to do that kind of work. And since a lot of the pieces I've done are sample-based, I think there's really room for something that could handle a lot of samples with just a couple knobs and, real-time control. So maybe I could do it that way.
Yeah.
It's better than just having one mouse, or programming a controller.
Sure. Yeah.
You know.
Well, and
But-
on the subject of controllers, do you find yourself using a lot of controllers when you're creating pieces in PD or Max?
Yeah, I usually just want to have several knobs available and several buttons to get to different parts of the piece, turn on and off things. I like having some large knobs for emergencies, that kind of thing. I've been using a sort of grid controller. I don't have to name brands, but
Sure.
a grid controller plus a few knobs is really very useful.
Yeah.
And then when you run out of things, you put things on the keyboard, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, or I guess backtracking a little bit. So it seems like, you're in your quarterly semester right now, or I guess your quarter.
Yeah.
And you've told us a little bit about what your students have helped with your projects and stuff. How has it been? I mean, and so you've been teaching for a long time as well.
Yeah.
So you're producing this freeware, producing these paid plugins, and also teaching, and, and doing other music projects and everything. How, and also the process of building plugins. You mentioned that you build plugins as part of your class as well. Or like you get to show the students the process of building a plugin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has that been an interesting thing for your own development of plugins? And I guess they.
Well, yeah. I mean,
asking this for
there's always a tendency when you're teaching and showing them something is to do things that are so incredible that you just sort of try to wow the students in a way, but you got to resist that a little bit.
Sure.
And like, okay, this isn't like showing the students how good I can be, but rather just it's taking time to show the students the different concepts, to show them what they can do with filters, to help them understand basic ideas, how to do sample rate conversion, how to do filtering, how to use an FFT, and to do it in a way that, to explain it in a way that's really understandable and useful.
Mhm.
So that when they start using FFT, they know what the limitations are. They know that, a sine wave partial is going to show up in a couple different bins, and they have to deal with that. And just to understand what they're grappling with. So that's really satisfying. It's just bringing students to the point of understanding, and to the point of understanding where that enables them to actually build things or realize pieces or be creative themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Now, have you seen any really amazing things that your students have created that have just been something that blew your mind that you would never have thought of, or a new way of doing something?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about William Brent again. He did this really great timbre ID toolkit for PD, and it's really been useful. Now, the thing is, William was here a few years ago, but I'm just only catching up to him. This reflects that I'm both incredibly busy myself, that when I get to actually look and see what my students do, it's usually, I'm a few years behind. My current student, Greg Surgis, is doing some good work with all-pass filters now, and I saw his paper got accepted at the ICMC this year. So, but I haven't read the paper yet. But I know there's some depth there, and I saw how his paper got ranked. It's going to be a good one, But yeah, definitely, we try to inspire the students by example, but also we exhort to them that you better get your papers done and better work on something you're actually interested in and something that hasn't been done before or hasn't been dug into deeply enough,
Right.
So yeah, we're definitely proud of our students here.
Yeah. Well, very cool. I will definitely have to check that paper session out when I'm down at ICMC.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that'll be my next focus, I think. Well, the summer brings a lot of things. It brings a lot of new projects, but of course I have to organize the ICMC. That's my other job this year is I'm the president of the ICMA. If you didn't know that.
Yep. Well, and I know that you work very closely with the featured guest speaker this year.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, Miller. Well, his office is across the hall, so we kind of can't avoid each other. But yeah, we're constantly bugging each other. I'm probably bugging him a lot more than he bugs me.
Nice. Yeah, he was on our show before, and it was a very interesting interview. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, one other thing that you have done that I find really interesting is that you helped design CalArts Dizzy Gillespie recording studios.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that and what went into that?
Well, yeah, I'm an audio engineer as well,
Mm-hmm.
so I've produced over 100 CDs. I stopped counting.
Yeah, your discography is massive.
Yeah. Well, when you're a
Without
recording
limitation.
engineer, you tend to get, you just show up a lot of times. But yeah, I try to work on contemporary music. I try to work on electronic music, but I also try to get into lots of different things. So, I did a series of gamelan CDs. I did, lots of different stuff, whatever is interesting at the time. But yeah, I've designed a few studios over the years, and the Dizzy Gillespie Studios, that was a donation from Herb Alpert that helped us do that.
Cool.
And we had 2 classrooms at CalArts, which we were kind of using for studios. And that allowed us to take those classrooms and bring them up to snuff, more or less. We did acoustic treatments to all the rooms. We made the control room pretty dead. We put a giant diffuser in the back of the room, redid all the electronics, put a bunch of sort of pyramid diffusers in the ceiling to scatter the audio. But yeah, I mean, the point was to make a little useful studio for the students to just do whatever they want, and also to get some experience working in somewhat of a real studio. Now, it is still 2 classrooms. The rooms aren't big enough. That would be my complaint. But one of the main things that I always like doing in a studio is I like making the thing accessible. The place is open 24 hours, 7 days a week, and it's open to just about any student who wants to get in there. So, well, whoever gets to sign up first. I don't know if this is still the policy at CalArts, but I've always tried to make the studios I've run really accessible to the students and really open.
Nice. Now, on the subject of audio engineering and recording, you have, in fact, created some really interesting CDs of very diverse music. Were there any that were just particular challenges or joys to record in terms of the engineering aspects?
Yeah, I don't know do you do recording? Have you recorded any CDs?
As an amateur, yes.
Yeah. Both of us.
Yeah, and once you're done with the CD, can you listen to it?
I usually need a week off at least before I'm ready to do that.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of on 3 or 4 years before I can. But it's very hard. I mean, you work in the studio and you're working with really nice speakers, and you're getting really intimately involved in the music, and it takes a while to just become the listener again. As soon as I hear a piece of music that I've worked on, I want to work on it some more. I want to, just like, we can change these relations. One of the ones I did recently was with Alvin Lucier and Charles Curtis and a lot of members of the San Diego Symphony, a piece called Slices, and I think this came out on a New World CD, maybe Pogus. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But this was a piece for 52 orchestral instruments, and each instrument is playing a single note. And in the center is a cello doing a slow melody, and as the cello plays the different notes, the players who are playing that note come in and out of the piece. So it's like so many Alvin Lucier pieces, a very sort of simple framework, but really sort of elegant elegant performance. You know, when it's performed, it just, you hear all these things. So we I don't know why. I think we didn't have the budget to get a whole orchestra and do it as an orchestral setting. So what we did was I recorded every instrument individually, single notes.
Wow.
And I placed each musician on a stage where they would sit in the orchestra. And for like the violin, we had one violin player, and I lined up a row of chairs, and he would just sit down and play each part in each different chair, which is pretty funny for someone who's always in the first chair. But you know, and then I took all of those recordings and I edited them together by hand. So I took the score and just edited every note in place. The one thing I didn't quite realize is that we should have provided more dynamics reference to the musicians while we were recording, because of course, you know, they were lacking the interaction they would get in a live setting.
Right.
And but I was responsible for then all the dynamics, all the spacing, all the attacks, you know. And I put that together entirely by hand. That was a lot of fun. The other thing, if you've heard the piece, it's these massive clusters, these massive chromatic clusters, and it was such a challenge for me to just make it balance so that not one voice would stand out. But at times they would come in and out like little threads in a tapestry, you know. And at the same time, the cello plays the melody along with that, and with 52 instruments all playing this big chromatic cluster, you still had to hear the cello line. So it was a big challenge mixing and automation, and even getting my DAW to deal with that many channels was a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, we made this like very, very sort of bracing and intense mix. You know, it wasn't a lovely mix. It was a challenging mix,
Cool.
which is always a little hard. It's a lot easier to make something pretty in the studio, you know, and be proud of it.
Yeah. You can just gloss it over with some extra sounds or wash a reverb or something. And
Oh yeah, there's none of that here.
it's great.
But yeah, I mean, making something that's challenging and then being proud of it, that's nice.
Excellent. Do you have any other recording projects coming up that you're looking forward to? Or?
Well, I did. Let's see. There's a bunch of pieces we're recording, and this I just got the email the other day, so I'm looking forward to them. But I don't. It's some Feldman pieces. I'm not sure. Okay. A piece that I did recently that I was quite proud of is one by Tashi Wada. We did 2 pieces for 2 cellos, and we did that with 2 microphones, completely live takes. I set the microphones up. We used no EQ, no compression, no reverb, and we went straight to an analog tape deck. And so we actually ended up using the digital recording at the end of the day, but it was basically 2 microphones to 2 channels, and that's what appeared on the CD. Wow. So that was sort of a challenge in just getting it right the first time, and that was fun.
It's like old school.
There's
like
so many things that could go wrong with that.
Yeah, but it's when you listen to it, you can hear it. You can hear that this is just, you know, what happened. You get this sort of, you know, immersion in the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about contrast between that and placing every note.
No, it's big. And most classical music, or most contemporary music, as you probably know, when you put together a CD, you are dealing with things maybe maybe a bar at a time, maybe a half a page at a time. You're doing a lot of edits to try to get the best of everything.
Yeah, I was telling Nate before the show, I spent 10 hours editing a session this weekend, so I'm intimately familiar with that right now.
Oh yeah, and part of it for me, I mean, at a certain point, I wanted to get beyond the feeling that this was work. You know, when I first started as an engineer, and I'm talking to myself as an audio engineer now, I would be quite a perfectionist and try to get everything perfectly balanced, perfectly edited. You can't hear any edit. It all sounds, timing's all perfect, all that kind of stuff. And I realized, okay, this is starting to feel like work, and it's starting to feel unpleasant, and it's making me a little jaded and all that kind of stuff. So I decided I wanted to make recording fun again. And so I started to look at big projects like challenges that I could be proud of. And then quick projects, it became like working in the moment, like see how responsive I can be and how involved. And so now recording's all about just enjoying, being part of the musical process.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now, with all the developments in recording technology, and how much is reliant on sample libraries nowadays, have you noticed any major ways in which that affects how you work?
Oh God, yeah. I'm sorry. I don't use samples for recording unless it's a piece that a computer musician is playing with samples,
Okay.
or sampling people live. So as far as sample libraries, it's really not. It's not a world I'm connected to.
Yeah.
I do teach some recording classes, and I have students bringing in things that are based a lot on sample libraries, of course. And there I just try to encourage them to, if you're going to use sample libraries, use bigger sample libraries. Don't give me the same kick drum every time. Vary it, make it sound expressive. But I also make them record things live too, just so they can hear what a good drummer can do with a kick drum. What kind of variation is possible.
Yeah.
And also what kind of timbre is accepted, what the range is for different types, different genres of music.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
So you mentioned all of the work that you did in DAW, and so not using sample library, or having that not be part of what you do. Do you have a preferred digital audio workstation? Or?
Oh, yeah, I use Pro Tools a lot.
Cool.
That I've used in the past maybe 10 years. It's always difficult using commercial software because the manufacturer has its own idea what their direction should be and how their things should work, and how they think, what's important. And so sometimes it gets irritating working with one DAW or another. So I'm always tempted to shift. Before I used Pro Tools, I used Digital Performer.
Yeah.
Before I used Digital Performer, I used analog tape decks. So and I used Opcode Vision. I mean, these are old things.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, Pro Tools has been it so far. But I could see switching. If there's a new free Traction coming out, that definitely perks my ears.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, there's that, and I'm about one step away from putting in a purchase order at work for Reaper. So.
Oh yeah. No, Reaper. I use Reaper a lot. and I use Ableton a lot. But usually when I'm working with my plugins, just trying to get everything to work, and sort of mocking up how would a person have a workflow with this tool.
Yeah. Which I definitely found in my personal work that when I started using Ableton, my workflow was definitely affected and changed a lot in how I would compose in a DAW.
Mm-hmm.
But that for recording, it stayed very much the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that word workflow again. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. The one thing that has been important to me is actually getting low latency monitoring through my DAW, and since I work in studios, getting a lot of headphone feeds going and those kind of utility things, and certain desktop DAWs are just not up to snuff, when it comes to that stuff, and I think that's what sort of sticks me with Pro Tools.
Yeah.
Is just you have really fast hardware, then it's like 2 sample delay from the microphone to the headphones, so that's good enough for most percussionists. Not for Steve Schick, but most percussionists.
Well, he's the exception that proves the rule, if anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's cool to hear about some of the upcoming recording projects that are.
Have you frozen?
I think we might have just lost Nate.
Yeah. He's looking thoughtfully in the air right now.
Yeah, I might have to screenshot that picture. Okay. There we go.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
You were saying
it's not
it's
an
cool to hear.
electroacoustic
You were just
music
saying it's
project.
cool to hear about these recording projects.
Exactly.
that you've got coming up, and I know you've still got some time left in the semester. And you mentioned some other summer things that are coming up, but do you have any other projects down the line, coding-wise or otherwise, that you're
Yeah,
excited
I mean,
about?
this is all hopeful. You know, what you want to do is hopeful. I mean, I've talked about certain things for a while, and if I don't get to them, please, anyone who's listening to the podcast, don't email me. Oh, you were talking about this, and you never get. But I always have more things lined up than I could possibly finish, and I think that's, generating a lot of ideas is good because you always go to either the one that's best or the one that you're most skilled at pulling off, right? Yeah. So what I'm planning on doing, I am planning on, right now I'm finishing up a module for Make Noise, and this is an oscillator. It seems that simple, but I turned it into an additive synthesis oscillator and a phase modulation oscillator and also a pitched noise oscillator that's based on the first computer music piece. Well, what I think of this, the first computer music piece, Analog 1 by James Tenney. It's a sort of interpolated noise source that has a frequency, and that's ring modulated with a sine wave. And you get these wonderful noise sidebands that you can change the width of. So this is what I'm finishing up. What I'm doing this summer, I intend to do 2 more modules, which I can't talk about. It's secrecy. But they're going to be cool. Okay, that's it.
Stupid NDAs.
It's not that. It's that if you say you're going to do it, sometimes you get going on a project, and it sounds really cool, but then you start implementing it, and it's not cool, and it's just like what everyone else did. You ran into the same problems everyone else did, and you think, well, there's no reason to crowd everyone with another one of these, so let's just do the other thing, So we for commercial things, I understand now not why you don't talk about it, but for my non-commercial stuff, I do want to do some convolution plugins.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly interested in doing synthesis by convolution. That is being able to sample the impulse response of, say, a marimba, and then sending different sort of impulses into it to trigger that, so that you can use it as a resonator, or, I know this approach has been done a little bit before, but I think not enough. I want to do that. I also want to make my own version of a DAW, which may be more a waveform analysis tool.
Okay.
And so it probably just be multiple channels of sound files where you can take the sound files and grab characters from them, establish other tracks that maybe represent spectral roll-off, flux, centroid, these kind of things, and then use those control tracks to do other things. And then the other idea in that is that I can drop little scripts on the sound files as markers, so that when it hits points, it'll execute scripts that might be in, I don't know, Julia or PyPy or something like that.
Okay.
So that's really, blue sky thinking.
I don't know.
Hopefully
I'd be really interested in having a DAW that I can use for spectral editing.
Oh yeah. No, it's definitely, I want it to be open to and programmable so that people can extend the objects and make it into something that they want to use. Plus, I would like to be able to, now that libpd is out, maybe embed PD patches in there as your sort of go-to plugin format.
Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense. Okay. I can't promise that.
But it would be cool, right?
But that's my idea, yeah.
Well,
Well,
I also want to do Alvin Lucier's Gentle Fire, so that involves collecting maybe 500 samples, and think about transformation of audio. But maybe these things will link together,
Cool. That's a weekend project, right? Yeah. It's
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Well, I certainly hope the stars align and we get to see that libpd DAW happening.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at the part of our show where Ben gets to, or where one of us tries to take on some hour lecture in a very short period of time. So this month it's Ben up for our 2-minute challenge. What are you going to talk about, Ben?
Well, I'm going to talk about square waves and duty cycles of square waves.
Oh, brilliant.
So, do we have a timer, Dave? All right. And you're not hearing any exploding PD stuff yet. Okay.
Cool.
All right. In classical synthesizers, there are a number of types of waveforms that you have available. Things like sine, saw, triangle, and square. And the last one is what we're interested in today as a starting point. So a perfect square wave has 2 states that it alternates between, on and off. Note that depending on what program you're using, I've seen these as either 1 and -1 or 1 and 0. That's another fight we can get to at a separate 2-minute challenge. What's important, though, is the idea that it's only alternating between these 2 states. There is no ramp between the 2. And what's also important is what's called the duty cycle, which is the percentage of a period in which the signal is on. In the case of an ideal square wave, this is 50%. So if you have a square wave with a 50% duty cycle, it's on half the time, off half the time. And you would get something that sounds kind of like this. But what if that's not the case? In fact, we can vary the duty cycle of a square wave for a given period to get a waveform that's less, well, square and more alternating between either short peaks with wide off points or wide on points and short off points. And doing that, we get timbral variations in the signal, somewhat like this. So this respacing of the peaks is done solely by varying the duty cycle and adjusting that. And this is the basis of what's known as pulse width modulation, according to some textbooks. It's a very useful technique when controlled by an LFO or by a wavetable to create really interesting sonic variations to an otherwise square wave. Huey Lewis said it's hip to be square, but this is more interesting.
You made it.
Very nice.
Well, thank you for that, Ben. How do you do, Tom? Sounds like a good layout of square and pulses and everything. And thanks, Dave, for the sound effects as well.
Yes. I love that new buzzer that we have in the background.
Mm-hmm. Well,
thanks, freesound.org.
Yeah,
Hey.
Exactly right. Sample player. So, well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and talking about the projects that you've done. I can't wait to hear some of these future ones. I'm going to take a look at some of those recordings. That one with the cello and like the orchestra resonant chamber kind of thing. That sounds like a really interesting piece.
Yeah, that's on Alvin Lucier's CD, Orchestral Pieces.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thanks again so much for sharing all these things with us. Steve, this is we have this opportunity now. If you have any last minute plugs or any things coming up that you'd like us to mention, yeah, please let us know. Or yeah, so how much time do you have left in the semester? Is it a couple
Yeah,
weeks?
I mean, that's the thing that I'm most excited about now. There's 2 weeks left in the quarter.
Cool, sweet.
And then I can think about what I'm doing again, you know.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks again for this, and we can't wait to see what's next for you. So this has been another episode of Patch In. Thank you so much for joining us. If you can find our show and all the past podcasts at soundnotion.tv/pi or in the iTunes Store or wherever you get your podcasts. Please support our show and the rest of our shows in the SoundNotion network. You can go to soundnotion.tv. There's a place to donate. There's a search box by Amazon that if you go through that to get whatever you're going to already get in Amazon, then we get a little bit of a kickback, and it helps support our show and the rest of our shows in our network. But anyway, this has been another Patch In. My name's Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
And we'll see you next month.